Okay, we were at the newsletter that George Bluebird and Tom Whitehawk were about to write. And, the wind of the newsletter got around, and the warden called him in and said, "I don't want you putting out this newsletter." And George didn't understand why, and the warden said, "Well, I don't want you saying anything that is wrong that's going to get out, out of the prison here." And George assured him, he's like, nothing is going to be done like that. He said, "The only thing we're going to talk about," he said, you can review the newsletter before it goes out. You'll have total authority over it. We're just going to be doing stories and language, and that's the only thing that will be said in the newsletter." Well, George had the impression that the warden had kind of agreed to it, but apparently the warden was upset that George had challenged him, and after he had said no. And so that night, around 3 o'clock in the morning, some guards came, and they got George Bluebird out of his cell. And they took him to Tom Whitehawk's cell, which was empty, except for his belongings. And they threw him in a cell and said, "Clean it up in here. Pack up his belongings. Get them all out of here." And George is like, what's going on? What happened? Where's Tom?" And they said, "Oh, he died of a heart attack. And you need to pack up his belongings and figure out where they're supposed to be sent." And George was beside himself, of course. I mean, he absolutely lost it. And of course, the reason that they had gotten him up at 3 in the morning and made him clean the cell was it was cruel, and it was meant to be cruel. It was to send him a message that if you defy the warden, you are going to be punished. Somebody will be punished. And they knew the best way to punish George was to kill Tom. But they had said it was a heart attack. And the funny thing about that was all of the inmates on that row had seen George wheeled out of his cell, strapped into a wheelchair, screaming, "Where are you taking me?" There was no heart attack. He was quite alive. He was quite well when he left. But the official cause of death was heart attack. And the only source is the prison. And George called me the next day, told me what happened. And he was suicidal. He couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't do it. He didn't want to be there without Tom, and he just couldn't do it anymore. It was something that he had the best of intentions with. Turned out that it killed his friend, and he felt responsible, and he couldn't accept that. And so, of course, I was beside myself too. George was about to kill himself. Tom had died, all over a newsletter that was intended to help Native young people. And I didn't know what to do, and I was in Michigan. I couldn't get to the prison. I had 2 young kids, and there was nothing I could do from where I was. And I called Frank Running Shield, who had been transferred to a different state, And I lied. I lied my ass off. I told them that I was one of his relatives and it was an emergency, and to let me talk to Frank. And I told Frank what was going on, and uh, he said he'd call George's relatives, and he gave me the number to Rita Means, who is the ex-daughter-in-law of Russell Means. And most people won't even know who Russell Means is, but he's a big deal in the Lakota community. But I was scared to death, kind of. Rita's very, very respected elder. And I didn't know what to say to her. And I called, and I just ended up... I don't even remember what I said the first time. And then I ended up calling back, and I told her, look, I'm sorry, but Tom Whitehawk has died, and George is suicidal, and you need to get to Sioux Falls Pen. She was out on Rosebud, and I said, you need to get to Sioux Falls Pen or send somebody or do something, because George is about to kill himself, and I'm in Michigan, I can't do anything, and I just lost it on the phone. And she assured me she was going to go out there, and she did. She went out there right away, and she talked to George. She talked him out of suicide, and she helped a lot of the other inmates in there who were having a very difficult time dealing with it, especially the ones who had seen him being wheeled out, screaming, where are you taking me? And my kitty wants to come up here. And so George got on the phone. She made him call me, and he said he promised me he wouldn't kill himself. And he said, I want you to do something for me. I want you to go out in the woods tonight. We had a designated time. We had to sync up the time differences. And he said, I'd like you to take a mug of coffee and a pack of cigarettes and go out in the woods tonight and pray to the ancestors and talk to George. And he said, I'll be praying at the same time. Oh, I'm getting emotional here again. Okay, stop it. So I did that, and I went out into the woods that night. It was pitch black, no moon, no anything, and I'm stumbling around in the woods with this little flashlight and a mug of coffee, and I walk out there, and I hear this crunch, crunch, crunch following me into the woods. And I stopped and listened, and crunch, crunch, crunch again when I moved. And this, whatever it was following me through the woods, but there was no way I was going to not do this. And so I found this nice little nook at the base of a tree that I could sit in. And I sat down, and I had my coffee, and lit a cigarette. I started talking, and all of a sudden I heard this lapping sound beside me. And I shined the flashlight over, and there was this cat. And it was just dark gray like storm clouds. It was a big tomcat. And I was like, hello, you're welcome to share my coffee. I was drinking my coffee, and I said, do you mind if I have some too? And I took another sip of the coffee and placed it down, and he drank some more, and he sat beside me, and I began to talk to the ancestors and to Tom Whitehawk. And the conversation kind of turned. I asked Tom, and I asked the ancestors if there's any way that you can get George out of prison. Please do that. I'm sorry, this is really hard. I said, please, He doesn't belong there. You know he doesn't belong there. Please get him out of prison. And I wrapped up the conversation, and I walked back to my house, and the cat followed me the whole way. And when I got home, I gave him some, I don't know, I had something in the refrigerator. I didn't have a cat, so I must have chopped up some bologna or something. Gave him some water, and the cat decided to stay. He became a permanent fixture of our family. But George, I called George, or George called me at the time we had set, and I told him about what had happened with the cat. And he said, "That's Tom. That's Tom Whitehawk." And I thought through his grief he was just kind of, personifying the cat. He wanted to make something more out of the incident than what it really was. But as it turns out, Tom Whitehawk was known throughout the prison as the Cat Man. The reason being was that he had found somehow a cat had gotten into the prison yard, and it was hiding under something. I don't remember what. And Tom would sneak food into his pockets out of the cafeteria and take it out, and he'd feed this mother cat. I think she was about to have kittens or something, and he took care of her and made sure she had food. And because of that, the inmates started calling him the Cat Man. And so, Tom believed very fervently that it was a sign that Tom had taken the body of a cat so he could be free and experience freedom for the first time in like 30 years. I don't know how long Tom was in. I don't remember. And that's how he took it. And I don't care if it was Tom Whitehawk or not in that cat's body. It gave him comfort to think that. And it was very beautiful that happened. But I'm running out of time again. I'm going to have to do another video and tell you the rest of the story.